The following is a continuation of an analysis of the All-Kill chapter. Let's keep going. Ji-Woon targeted those who lived alone, coming to them in the night. The first was a college music student with a captivating voice. Ji-Woon woke him with a baseball bat to the skull, binding his arms and legs, gagging him with a rag duct taped into his mouth. He tortured him for hours, dissecting him alive. Yet there was something missing, a sound, a connection. He wanted to hear the victim's wondrous voice pleading as he cut his belly open, but all he received was muffled cries through a rag. His crime involves kidnapping and torture. There may be a few other murders we've not been told about, given the plural use of targeted and those, but the focus here is on one killing. Ji-Woon is clearly sadistic and brutal, and at this point we should probably talk about psychopathy. Again, I want to reiterate a few things. As far as I can tell, psychopathy is a brain disorder in the same sense as autism or schizophrenia, specifically one that affects the amygdala of the brain. But others will contest me and say psychopathy is a personality disorder, or a trauma response, or that those two are the same thing. I really hope the 4 people that actually watch this video will give me the benefit of the doubt and appreciate these things aren't exactly easy or clear. Psychopathy is split into 2 components, primary psychopathy and secondary psychopathy. Primary, factor 1 psychopathy, which is just sometimes called psychopathy because apparently this wasn't confusing enough, is characterized by, amongst a great many other things, a lack of empathy much like the narcissist. But unlike some types of narcissist, the factor 1 psychopath feels no remorse, and it's important to make the distinction between empathy and remorse, as well as a distinction between guilt, shame, conscience, compassion, mercy, and the broader difference between affective and cognitive empathy. I'm reluctant to dissect the majority of these and what narcissists do and don't feel and why, because I'll be here forever, and again, I'm no expert, but I will make a point about empathy. There are 2 components, or there may actually be 3 or 4, but again, we'll just focus on the dominant 2, affective and cognitive. You're going to have to forgive me for glossing over a few things. Affective empathy is feeling what another person feels emotionally. Cognitive empathy is understanding what another person feels intellectually. Narcissists and factor 1 psychopaths have a serious deficit in the former, but might have a heightened sense in the latter, i.e. they have high cognitive empathy without the emotional components. I get the impression most autists have the opposite setup. Narcissists and factor 1 psychopaths are capable of scanning other people, and despite their impaired reality testing, at least with the narcissists, they learn things about others and understand people more accurately and quickly. This is called cold empathy, and the information cold empathy provides, which is usually quite good, is used to leverage others for narcissistic and/or goal-oriented means. Factor 1 psychopaths have similar callousness, shallow affect, and grandiosity like the narcissist, though I should imagine even a Factor 1 psychopath's grandiosity is dwarfed next to the godlike delusion of someone with NPD. But Factor 1s have a goal orientation to them and an even greater lack of regard for others in the low remorse and low shame and all the rest of it. And they typically don't have the entitlement, the envy, the fantasies, or the degree of arrogance that narcissists have. Ji-Woon's murders can only partially be explained by narcissism. Maybe his psychosis is a better explanation than simply reaching for the easy solution of "guys are psycho." But it isn't clear to me if narcissists have low affective empathy or no affective empathy. But I will say that torturing and killing someone would suggest no affective empathy whatsoever, as well as a marked lack of basic human decency. So I'm thinking many traits of Factor 1 psychopathy, but a personality dominated by narcissism. Secondary psychopathy, factor 2 psychopathy, sometimes colloquially called sociopathy, doesn't need to be considered too deeply here. It's more about impulsivity, irresponsibility, defiance, and conduct disorder. It's more akin to antisocial personality disorder, which you might remember is another cluster B personality disorder next to NPD. Despite this, I don't think ASPD fits Ji-Woon very well. I feel the need again to remind everyone that I'm not a mental health professional. I'm a bloke on the internet who may well have done his homework, but I'm not going to claim to be an authority here. I do know even the most learned people on this subject disagree on many points, so hopefully I don't cause too many arguments. All the worst as I start to look at real-world examples. Anders Breivik has been officially diagnosed with NPD, and his motivation was political. He murdered nearly 100 people. Elliot Rodger was never officially diagnosed, but I'd stake my reputation him being a particularly extreme and obvious example, and he was motivated by vengeance and a staggering level of entitlement fueled by hatred and left 6 dead. These real-world narcissists had a disregard for those they killed at best, and venomous, all-consuming contempt at worst. Ji-Woon's motivation for murder is far more abstract. Has fame corrupted his already muddled mind? You could make the case with Ji-Woon, but his seems more exploratory and trying to find some kind of emotional response. It's said his tears were genuine after No Spin burnt to death, and maybe he's trying to recreate that feeling. We can see on his character model he has the tears, and I don't think it's because he's an Alice Cooper fan. As I understand it, all types of narcissists feel negative emotions, but not positive ones, or at least they don't have access to positive emotions. But why would he want to experience more negative emotion? Displacement of his own unhappiness? I don't know. But then I remember that Factor 1 psychopaths, apparently, don't feel any emotion at all, or if they do, it's so far removed from what normal people feel, they may as well be aliens, or so I'm told. And of course, a sadistic component is strong for some of them. And so, more and more evidence piles up on Ji-Woon also being an innate Factor 1 psychopath. And there's even some evidence that the typical grandiose, overt narcissist is a true representation of Factor 1 psychopathy. But what is Yun-Jin doing? Well, she and her star are touring the world. I want to explore some story elements. The Trickster was world famous, a household name. I think at this point the plot has become too fantastic in-universe, but it still works as far as I'm concerned. Although I am wondering just how many he really killed. 3 more victims are detailed later, but the kill count could well be in the dozens. Meanwhile, Yun-Jin herself is described as weary after the deaths of No Spin, and she's clearly acting like Ji-Woon's manager and best friend at this point. Again, she shows concern that's more than just professional, but what strikes me is how goal-oriented she is. She's more organised and dominating than her ward. Both of these traits are somewhat psychopathic, but Ji-Woon has her beat. Victims had to be abducted, driven to an abandoned building where he could let their voices carry unrestrained emotion. He made music from them, prodding in the right places to evoke different types of shrieks and howls, stabbing the quadrus laborium, eliciting a long guttural wail, while slashing the carotid artery created a sound like a cat being strangled. There was honesty in their suffering. Ji-Woon recorded each session, synthesizing and working them into his songs, hiding them behind layers of melodies. Yeah, we've gone into full-blown crazy. I'm not sure why the quadratus laborium muscle and carotid artery were specifically mentioned, maybe to illustrate how much he's practiced on many different people and or extensively on a few individuals, or maybe to illustrate how he's done his homework in understanding biology, despite the fact that it seems a bit silly to imagine you can get a certain sound from a certain person by cutting a certain thing in a certain way. In-universe, Ji-Woon is intelligent, and his murders betray some of that intelligence. To give narcissists and psychopaths their due, like autists, they are typically smarter than average. Of course, there are exceptions, and that's not to say every narcissist is intelligent, or even to say that every narcissist has an above-average IQ. I'm sure everyone listening to this knows at least one stupid narcissist, and good luck trying to convince them they're stupid. But as a general rule, when empathy goes down, intelligence goes up. There is a darkness to having a fast and adaptive mind, a terrible price to pay for such a gift. But I'm not going to aggrandize narcissists. They're not supermen, despite what they might tell you. Far more importantly, we've encountered a component that is very common amongst real-world serial killers. They often make recordings. The Toolbox Killers, the Moors Murderers, the Boneyard Killers, the Snowtown Murderers, the Wests, and others. These are some of the very worst from my project, and viewer discretion is strongly advised with those cases. Between the bloodlust and the eerie eloquence of it all, Ji-Woon's reminding me of a vampire. Narcissists are naturally very vampiric. They typically have smooth, cat-like movements, slow and deep voices, are innately seductive and rather intelligent. In this case, the myths fit the mental disorder. I get the impression that every culture in the world has some variant on the bloodsucker, and my intuition tells me this is tied to narcissism, a phenomena as global as Ji-Woon's career. As creatures that drink the lifeblood of others, narcissists harvest narcissistic supply. This is background or ambient abuse that narcissists inflict on the people around them, whether they realise it or not. The vampire is weak to sunlight, blessed water, and sharp wood. These are very weak source weaknesses for a creature that's otherwise so powerful and intelligent and formidable. But similarly, the narcissist has serious cognitive deficiencies, is impaired when learning new skills, and is very limited on what they can do. They're not real people, they're fake caricatures, parodies of people, damaged children masquerading as grown-ups. Narcissists also have that no-soul vibe anyone with intuition can pick up on. There's an emptiness there, as the image they project onto the world is a compensatory facade, giving them this hollow impression, however charming they might be. This emptiness also plays into the reflection aspect of the myth. A narcissist's sense of true self is so poor, their own reflection is slightly alien to them. If you don't believe me, remember the myth of Narcissus himself. What many people forget about this myth is he didn't realise it was his own reflection he'd fallen in love with. He can't see himself in the reflection, just like the vampire. How ironic, a mental disorder stereotyped as being vain and obsessed with reflections can't see themselves for who they truly are. Narcissists are the living dead. It's someone who rejected life, and someone who lives a cursed and wretched existence. An exaggeration of a human being with an inner world most people cannot imagine. Those yellow eyes might as well be as red as the devil's. The idea of having a vampire in Dead by Daylight is something I've read about a lot, but have mixed feelings towards. Dracula, along with Frankenstein's monster, the werewolf, and the swamp creature from the Black Lagoon, feel too pre-1960s. It's been done, and they're old hat, and including any of them in the game feels derivative. But as I've explained, Ji-Woon stands in very nicely for a vampire, a modern interpretation based off classic myths. Behaviour did something similar with the Blight, who had a Jekyll and Hyde vibe going on. But with the Trickster, the team have outdone themselves. The blood spatters seal the deal, because what is a vampire without blood? I don't want to go on too long for this one passage, but there's another point I want to make. Putting the screams of your victims into your music. That's a very interesting thing to do. You absolute nutter. It reminds me of Hannibal Lecter feeding human flesh to unknowing guests. And there are real-world serial killers that did this. Joseph Metheny and Carl Grossman both very likely sold human meat as food. That catchy pop song you enjoy? It features someone being tortured to death in the background. How would you react if the truth ever came out after listening to the song several dozen times? How would you feel if you learnt that a burger you ate was actually a local prostitute? Hannibal Lecter has also been compared to Dracula, but it seems he and Ji-Woon aren't the only ones with a touch of the vampire and or subliminal dramatic irony. Putting your own special touch into songs. If you've read all the lore, you've seen this before. I quote, "Put sound bites into her songs that looped her artist name, magnum opus." My lord, what's going on here? Was Ji-Woon inspired by what Yun-Jin used to do in her early days? Did she tell him? Or do great minds think alike? It further highlights the mounting evidence that these two are mirroring each other, and mirrors are a key symbol of narcissism. It also starts to beg the question of just how responsible Yun-Jin is for the Trickster. Ji-Woon left hints for the police, arranging a mink boa from a recent photo shoot around a victim's slashed throat. For his next killing, he removed the teeth from a man that a boxer in one of his music videos was without. During a particularly audacious plea for attention, he killed a fan he had met during a VIP meetup, replacing her eyes with his diamond cufflinks and written, "I have seen God in blood" across her chest. Here we are given details into 3 more murders, and another grim reality: staging. I'm reminded of Colin Ireland, who posed his victims in degrading positions and set up the crime scene. Danny Rolling also did this. One of the Hillside Strangler murders had the body dumped almost aesthetically, but for the most part killers don't care what the police think of their flair, and many actually go to great lengths to in fact hide the bodies, Gacy, Ridgway, West, etc. Although this kind of staging does happen. I understand most players saying this is where their immersion in the character was totally lost, if it wasn't lost far before this point. It must have been these 3 victims and a few others that were featured in the Trickster's latest songs. I feel the writer missed a beat here. Ji-Woon's first victim, the victim who was gagged, was a music student probably looking to break into the industry. How deliciously cruel would it have been if his debut into the music world would be his dying screams on a K-pop single? I find this a tasty invocation on the Aesop "be careful what you wish for", and this could also be considered a theme of the chapter. Both Ji-Woon and Yun-Jin technically got what they always wanted, but at the cost of almost everything. The Mighty One record label also got what they wanted. Something to think about. One of the victims was a fan that, according to the Diamond Cufflink add-ons, stalked the pop star. She wanted to get a closer look at her idol, and got exactly what she wanted. But I have a lot more to say about this particular victim because killing one of his own biggest fans is interesting. As I said, the narcissist has contempt for others, and especially for those he deems lower than him. It makes sense he'd want to kill them, despite being dependent on the attention they give. Or maybe even because of the dependency. I think the narcissist is dimly aware of this dilemma. It helps for the narcissist to view others as less than human. This ties into a process known as snapshotting, where the narcissist effectively takes a mental Polaroid of the other and interacts with this Polaroid. The narcissist cannot empathize, so he assumes everyone is like him. Everyone is just as fake and wretched. And deep down he hates himself and feels like he's an imposter. I won't go too deep into narcissistic projection at this point, but just elaborate on how narcissists view others. You're a caricature, a tool to be used for gratification in one form or another, or to be discarded. Human beings are commodified as interchangeable with very limited value. You are an NPC who will either give quests or XP or loot from your corpse. Other people are objects, toys, dolls, chess pieces, all to be moved and manipulated by superior intellects, such as himself. Don't think for a second you're anything more than that. He views you as a cardboard cutout. Is the narcissist even capable of friendship? I don't know. I don't think it's impossible, at least not by their own standards and in their own way. And Ji-Woon in particular does have one very real friend. We'll talk more about her next time.